Hello and welcome to the Life with Libbie podcast. This podcast is all about empowering women to find their magic. This podcast is conscious-based and we'll be going into the very details of life that all women walk through. Enjoy.
So my name is Lauralynn. I don't know if maybe a bit of history helps. I've known Libbie probably for close to 10 years now, I guess. And went to high school together, which I'm sure details will come up about that. But lots of history and a lot of things that kind of have come in and out of that. But here we are, somehow in really similar places in life, despite some very different journeys to get there. So
Exactly.
That's the relationship.
I'm so excited to have Lauralynn here because we were just, catching up the other day and it was like, stop, like that's exactly where I'm at in my life right now. And it's just really crazy because like you said, we have had very different lives. And I've gone and like done my shit and you have like done your shit and we've like haven't lived in the same city for like ever for a really long time. And now we actually live in the same city, but there's COVID. So we're not even able to see each other. But that's okay because, doing these Zoom podcasts are really fun.
They are.
They look great.
I spend all day on Zoom now, so.
Yeah, doing your work from it. That's
welcome to the pandemic.
The population. Which is fun, but I brought Lauralynn onto the show today because I wanted to get her to talk about her experience of being in church and being in a very like charismatic evangelical church, growing through that. Lauralynn has since left the church. And with her and her husband, it wasn't, separate. They're together and they really went through this incredible journey together. So I'm really excited for her to share her story. And I know that it's going to empower some of you listeners.
Yeah. I guess maybe some groundwork. As maybe a precursor, when I talk about my qualms with, quote, Christianity, end quote, I always want to preface it by saying that not all of Christianity can fall under the same umbrella. And I do find it important to differentiate this whenever I talk about it with people, because I have a lot of problems with a lot of versions of Christianity, but it's such a wide tradition and it has such a long history that I don't want to paint it all with the same brush. Having said that, the version of it that we see in North America nowadays is like a Western evangelical type of religion, and that's the version that I have my problems with. But my kind of exposure to Christianity was an interesting evolution in and of itself. I did not grow up with super strong Christian expectations. My parents weren't overly concerned with like raising me to read the Bible and pray at dinner and say my prayers before bed. It was very casual. They brought us to church when I started to become a little bit older. I enjoyed it because we got snacks and played games on Sundays, but that was about it. As I got older, probably at around like 15 or kind of the beginning of high school, I really dove deep. So for myself, it was probably spurred on by a few things. I think that I had a lot of mental health problems from a pretty young teenager, even child. And so I think that I finally reached a point in my life where that was kind of the only thing that I knew to turn to. I didn't really have any other tools or resources in my box. So I really did kind of dive deep into like evangelicalism. So when I when I got into it, there was no looking back for me. Well, I eventually did look back, but I didn't think there was any looking back at the time. But I went into what I would now call like my fundamentalist phase. So there was no other way for truth or life or anything. I really, really thought I had it figured out. And I also that was when I kind of started exploring maybe more of that like charismatic, rolling on the floor, barking like dog stuff, which is not, it's not something that I grew up with at all. I grew up in a much more conservative tradition. And so kind of getting exposed to that was really interesting at first. Actually, ironically, the very first exposure that I had was going to your church.
Oh my God.
I didn't even think of that before I said it, but yes, that was my very first
I
time.
remember that actually, and I remember you saying like, it's really weird that you guys like speak in tongues, or like that your pastor does it like on stage. And I remember you being like, actually in the Bible, it says you shouldn't.
Okay, well, you know what happened before that? I came with you guys one Sunday and we're praying before Sunday school. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And everyone started speaking in tongues. And afterwards I was like, what language were you speaking? I absolutely had no idea what was going on. I literally was like, what language are you speaking? That wasn't Spanish, was it? Like,
my heart. Oh my God.
Yeah, and then you and Cleopatra literally just looked at me like dumbfounded. Like, tongues. We're speaking in tongues.
In tongues.
Like, what? So yeah, that was my introduction. Thank you. From there, it really, I really took it on in like a whole new way. That became, well, actually looking back now and looking back at the progress of my mental health journey, I also actually now understand in a more clinical way that a lot of that was super manic for me. There were a lot of those kind of behaviors that your more typical manic behaviors that I didn't really display to the same extent that people typically look for in them. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me, it was really that elevated sense of spirituality. I mean, there were times where I was just through the roof, just like, I can hear God. I know exactly what's right. I have the answer for everything, right? And I mean, at the time, it really just felt like I was genuinely like hearing the Holy Spirit and just knew what people wanted and needed and knew the way. And I'm not discounting the fact that you can hear God or hear the divine or have instincts or intuition or anything like that, because I think that in a lot of ways I still possess those. But the feeling is really different. So I was really into it. I think another piece of why I connected so well with that, at least that version of the tradition, is it sort of brought me closer. It brought me a step closer to where I think I was aiming to end up. Right. Maybe not consciously, but I think that I've always sort of had a connection to things that are more spiritual and are, I want to use the word magic because I don't know that I have a different word for it. Like it truly feels like magic to me in a way, right? Even as a small child, I was just obsessed with it.
I think magic can be like a really appropriate word to use. Yeah. Because, I study anthropology, and magic is literally the belief in anything that's kind of supernatural. That's just more beyond the physical. And I remember studying that, and I was like, what? Christianity is a magic?
Yeah, but it's also a myth. It's also a myth. And myth doesn't actually mean untrue. You know, like people hear myth and it's a super offensive word for somebody, especially like Christians, because they're like, what? My religion is not a myth, it's truth. But a myth is a meaning-making story, right? And that's what I see religion, and not just religion, but any sort of belief system. It's a meaning-making system, right? So it's as humans, we we find these meaning making systems because it helps us answer the questions of life. And I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with it. I actually think it's a beautiful part of humanity. The problem is, I think, when people take those meaning making stories and then turn them into dogma, that's when it gets problematic.
For sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I think getting into that charismatic phase was sort of the stepping stone from not really being overly religious, but also not really feeling like I had proper connections with anything. I didn't really feel connected to myself. I didn't feel connected to anybody else. I think that in-between phase was really important in terms of me kind of connecting with myself and I guess with maybe the more immaterial part of myself.
Right.
And the idea that I got to know my spirit or my soul or my
Right.
immaterial being, whatever kind of words you want to put to it, but
which can be so liberating for a person who's not connecting with other people or not connecting in a way that they want, and then being able to get on that spiritual level and feel such a divine connection. I think that oftentimes that can be kind of very addicting. And
so addicting.
Yeah, be like in the
100%.
same way that
Yeah.
we are addicted to like our social medias, our likes, our like, and it's not necessarily healthy either.
No, that's 100% true. There's a tiny rabbit trail I'll go down here because that's really interesting, the thought I just connected. But I was listening to a podcast by an author that I love, and he was talking about the idea of he called it supernormal stimuli, and it came out of some like psychological studies about the idea of our modern society. Our brains weren't actually developed for it, right? So our brains are actually living like far outside of what we were evolutionarily created for.
Okay.
By created, evolutionarily, but evolved for. There was an experiment done, if I get I'm paraphrasing, so some of the details might be paraphrased. But there was a guy who did a study with baby birds, or mama birds and baby birds. And so what they did is they actually took eggs out of the nest, and they replaced some of the eggs with brighter, bigger, super blue eggs, like bigger and brighter than all the other eggs, but they were wood, like they were clearly a fake egg. And the whole kind of goal of the experiment was to see if the mother bird would know that it was a fake egg and not take care of it, or whether it was bigger and bluer and therefore she would put her focus into it. And obviously she put her focus into it, actually to the neglect of her real egg babies. Wow. They went one step further and actually, it's super interesting, but they went one step further and then had actually baby birds, and they put in a little wooden baby bird with its mouth open, and it had this big open mouth with like bright red paint inside. And the mom would literally try to feed the wooden baby bird over her other babies. And that kind of started this theory about like supernormal stimuli. It's that our brains are so geared towards survival that when we experience these things that are outside of what we would have through history, it's like overdrive. So pizza would be a really good example because, pre-modern era, the concept of pizza being a meal is unfathomable. You've got bread, so you've got like a grain, and then you have like sauce, which is like vegetables and all these other things and the kind of processing you'd have to go through to create a sauce. And you've got cheese, so you have to have dairy and you process the dairy to make cheese. And then you have meat, so you have to slaughter and like cure all your meat. It's insane. Like there would never ever have something like that created. And right. So we put pizza in our mouth and our brains are firing off. Like it's literally addicting. Our brains will literally choose something that is overstimulating, even though we know it's bad for us. Wow. Because of that overstimulation. And I'm not necessarily saying that kind of divine kind of encounter is bad for us. I actually think it's incredibly good, but it is addicting, right? Because it's this like elevated kind of existence where it's brighter and it's bigger and it's more real.
And at times it can feel very euphoric, right? So there's
absolutely,
like, you know, some people get like super into meditation or like super into yoga, and that's something that like they can't let go of because that's their like their road, their pathway to having that intense feeling of like, but that emotion that's too big for us to even understand.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, but I think really what everyone feels in those places is a sense of like interconnectedness and like a wholeness. And I think that's really interesting because that's where like the word holy comes from, is the word whole, and like to be complete. And I think that's what everybody is searching for in any way,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And it's so good to feel those feelings, but at the same time, if like we're not able to sit with ourselves, that feeling will never be enough for us.
Absolutely. I actually heard somebody say, like, articulate this in a way that I've always kind of thought but never could quite articulate. But the entire idea of the golden rule is like, you know, treat others how you would treat yourself, or how you would hope that they would treat you. The entire basis of that is self-love. Because if you don't actually love yourself and want to treat yourself well, then you also won't be able to treat other people well. And that can come off super cheesy, but it is. I mean, like if Jesus said, love others how you love yourself, that means you actually have to love yourself first. Right? So, you know, I think that there is a large portion of my life, and will probably be till the end of my life, but where, you know, I do try to love people. I really do try to love people around me. And I think that I have done well at points and done atrociously at other points. But it gets easier to love people when you can also love yourself in a way. And there are good days and there are bad days. Some days I wake up and I'm like, wow, I literally hate myself. And other days I wake up and it's like, yeah, it's good to be alive, and I'm here, and I'm going to do something amazing today. But that's, I don't know, I think that's kind of normal, right? Totally normal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nod, thank you. Yeah, I don't know, it feels kind of, it feels like a human experience.
Absolutely. So then when you're like, so what, you're like in your teenage years, you're going through this, you're like, I'm all in, nothing's going to stop me. I know you went on your trip to Africa. You did you went to work at an orphanage in Africa. So that was pretty huge.
You did? Yeah. My Facebook memories remind me frequently.
Oh my goodness.
Do you want me to comment on that?
Go for it.
I don't really think at this point in my life that this might be a strong statement to make, but I don't really think at this point in my life that there is a socially responsible way to do any sort of missions work. I think that it's super toxic. I think that it's white savior complex kicking in. It is a complete insult to the intelligence of these people in their community. Humanitarian work is a different kind of conversation. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be working to bring clean water to villages without clean water. Those things are still important, because I do believe in self-sacrificing love, and I do believe in those values still. But the presumption that I'm going to go and share something with them about God that they don't already have is incredibly arrogant.
Wow. I completely agree with you, especially so from the anthropological perspective. A lot of what people do, and even the humanitarian stuff, is really like, wow, because there was actually like an issue with people in their Tinder profiles, and they're like the white person, they're the subject, and they're using little black children as objects to make them, to glorify themselves. And like there's so much humanitarian work that's super problematic. NGOs are super problematic. And, you know, that's not to say that like we have the answers, but as anthropologists, we're able to go in and look at this and see like, oh shit, like this is maybe not as great as we thought it was going to be. This is blah, blah, blah. And there's actually a lot of, so people who take languages and make them into written languages, those people are more often than not missionaries that are learning people's languages to write down the language, to write a Bible for them, to teach them an entirely new religion and concept. Yeah. And like, that's it. That's the only reason they're making these languages written, not to be like, let's save language, let's do this. It's like, there's
no respect for the language or the culture. It's just a means to an end, and the end that they're going for is turning them into just mini versions of themselves.
And it's very like patriarchal. It's very
incredibly patriarchal,
colonial. Like, you know, like you said, that white savior complex, like, let me come and save you. It's this idea that like up here in the global north, that we're so much more modern, that we have the ideas, we have the intelligence, and like these people are developing and we need to help them. And it just like irritates me so much. And I had issues with mission trips before I even like started studying in this field, because I remember going and doing a Mexico trip when I was like 13, and it was $2,000 to go. Okay. If for like, I don't know, a week or 10 days or something. So this was a while ago, right, guys? This was like 13 years ago. And so prices were, you know, even cheaper then for like 4 or 5 star resorts. And we were sleeping in like a house with no security. And it was like not in a great place. It was like a mission trip, you know?
Yeah.
And on concrete floors, there was no beds. We slept like it was just like, wow, okay. It was really scary. Like our shower didn't even like close. Like anybody could have just like walked by and seen you. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
You're good. Yeah,
okay.
You're good.
So it was awful. There was nothing there. And just, I'm sorry for $2,000. And then we went and stayed at like the church who brought us there, and they set up a big tent, and we had to sleep on the grass outside the church.
Wow, okay.
Like I'm not like there was no preparation for us. Okay. I have gone to like a 4-star, 5-star resort. All my food, all drinks included, really nice place with airfare for like $1,000. Okay, so there had to be at least 20. There was maybe 30 or 40 of us who went on this trip. $2,000 each. Okay, let's say there's 20. That's $40,000. Who took this money and where did it go? Where did it go?
100%. Yeah. And what could $40,000 have done in those communities?
Right.
That you guys didn't do, because what can you do when you're there for 10 days?
Right.
Nothing.
Like, what
literally nothing.
We put on like plays, and we were like,
cute. That's great.
This is a savior. Oh my boobs slipped out. It's just like so normal for me. Like my boobs are always out.
Amazing.
Like, you know, but yeah, like what are you gonna do? But what $40,000 could do for a community there? Like, let's start businesses. Let's get people loans. Let's do whatever. Get them food.
Let's send some girls to school.
Yeah. Let's send some people to university. Let's buy their books, buy their textbooks. Let's help people. But no, it was more to make us feel good. And it was like, I remember coming back and speaking at church, and we were like, oh my God, these people have nothing. And like, it just made me feel so blessed to live here. Yeah. And I'm like, like, oh my gosh, like I cannot believe like that was, you know, kind of like my mentality. And it is this sense of like, you're better than them. And even though it's not outright said, it's there. It's not overt, to someone who's in it, I think it might be overt to other people who are like on the outside looking in. But when you're in it, you really feel like, oh my God, I did so much good. Oh, I played with little children. And it's like, they didn't need me there, you know?
No, they didn't. No. If I believe that I have an innate ability to connect with the divine, then I also need to believe that they have an innate ability to connect with the divine.
Absolutely.
And if I don't, you know, and like, if I don't need an intermediate, then neither do they either, right? And that's, man, the mentality has changed. And when I think back to my intentions of that trip, they were as good as could have been at that time. Like, I genuinely wanted to help. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to save the world. I wanted to love people. And I did, sort of, in my own little way, but none of them remember me. You know, none of the orphans I prayed for remember me.
Yeah.
Why would they? Right? Like, I didn't do anything for them, you know? I remember it because it was a life-changing event for me.
Yeah.
But
I didn't. You, right? That's
exactly,
it. It's for
exactly.
you. You go for you. And that's what's like, we recognize it now. But growing up in that, or, you know, not necessarily growing up in it, but like choosing to get into that charismatic Christianity.
Totally. Yeah.
That's such a huge part of it, is like, you have to go into all the world. Go to Africa, go to Mexico, go to Romania and help those gypsies.
Go to save those poor heathens. Yeah. Essentially. We actually talked about this when I was at Bible college, and we actually talked about short-term missions. And you know what? Even in the Bible college setting, the kind of consensus in the class was that short-term missions are not helpful for the people you're going to. The only purpose they serve is kind of that life-altering, eye-opening moment for the students going on those trips.
Right.
But I actually think that the damage that they cause in those communities at this point, the damage that they cause far outweighs any of those life-changing epiphanies that the kids might have. You know what? If you need to interact with poor people to have some sort of like epiphany, there are lots of people who need your help and who could be loved right outside your door. Right outside your door.
Absolutely.
The need to travel halfway across the world, to put fuel into the air, to spend thousands of unnecessary dollars just to feel like a savior is super twisted.
And if you really want to do that, maybe give that money to a grassroots cause or grassroots, you know, operation that's going on there that the people really do need finances, but it's run by them. Right? I think that's the best way to go about doing that.
Similar kind of topic, but like so kind of similar thread that my brain just brought me to, but slightly divergent. I also, this whole theme of arrogance in Christianity, or in at least evangelicalism, is something that I'm constantly becoming more and more and more aware of. And one of the really interesting kind of, you know, as I started seeing bits and pieces of that arrogance and of those cognitive dissonance, one of the things that I became absolutely appalled by with time was the entire narrative that I hear evangelicals use surrounding like saving Muslims. And the whole conversation, you've probably heard it yourself. We may have even said it to each other at one point, but it's like, oh, they just need to like meet Jesus, you know, like they've got so much going on. They're so devoted. They're so good at what they do. You know, could you imagine if Christians prayed 5 times a day? Like, oh my gosh, the things we could do, you know, like they're so devoted, but all they really need is like a revelation of Jesus. Okay. But we probably did say that to each other, right? Like,
I'm so sure. Oh my God.
It is so appalling.
Really embarrassing.
It's incredibly embarrassing, yeah. And a part of me wants to never, ever, ever make those kind of things public. I don't want anybody knowing that something like that ever came out of my mouth. But at the same time, I actually think that to begin to dismantle those beliefs and dismantle that whiteness, those kind of conversations do need to happen, right? Like, I need to be able to publicly say, like, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Like, I'm sorry that I ever let myself believe those things. I'm sorry I ever let myself speak those things. I'm you know, I will spend the rest of my life repaying that, not in a guilt-driven way, but in a way that's like, I want to repair. I want reparations, you know?
Right.
But the whole idea that like all they need is to meet Jesus. That's it. All they need is to just meet Jesus, and they're going to have this like wonderful revelation. Because,
but like, tell them that. They're like, no. I know Jesus.
I know Jesus.
Like, Jesus is like, I listen to Jesus already.
He's literally one of our prophets. That and the other narrative that I often heard is like, well, you know, once they understand the gospel, they're going to understand that like they can have like a grace, like a grace-driven or grace-based religion, and that God's going to forgive them. Well, okay, yes, it is. It is. It is. But I remember, so this is what kind of changed it, is I remember a conversation I had with one of my closest friend who's Muslim, and I remember talking about something or other, and she stopped me. She's like, well, okay, we love Jesus, but like we don't utilize him in that same way, right? Like there's no magic prayer we can pray to just have our whiteboard erased, you know? Like we're actually we're trying to live well every day and in every moment of every day. And to her, in a super respectful way, like we had an incredibly respectful, like healthy friendship, but to her, it was like, it's like a cheat card. Like we just have like this cheat card in our religion. Yet we think it's this like salvation card that like as soon as they understand the forgiveness of the gospel, that they're gonna just fall at Jesus' feet, like, oh goodness, thank you for forgiving me, that's, you know, all I've ever wanted. They're not, I mean, and that's obviously, you can't paint all of them with the same brush, but it's so arrogant to think that they've just been sitting there their whole life yearning for what you have, you know? Like, I have this thing and they're just desperate for it. They're not desperate for it. They have their own understanding of God. They've lived that relationship, and yet we just have this unending arrogance. Right?
Yeah. You're totally right. You're totally right about that. It's, but I think that's like a huge thing for you to have really unlearned from that, and to be able to look back at your own arrogance and seeing like, oh shit, and seeing these like really ugly parts of you, really ugly things that you've said, right? Like, because the things that we say are really things that are inside of us, like, you know, deep down, right? Yeah. And so when you say like, oh, if it's just this, what that is like, well, what I have is better than what they have. What I am is better than what they are. But you can be, like, I have a path for you to be as good as me. And I think, and like you said, it's quite arrogant, because you're not saying like, okay, well, what is this? What do they say? What do they believe? There's no question. Like, I had so many misconceptions about Islam. Totally. Because so I took a few Bible college courses, and one of them was about the Islamic faith. Yeah. Like, never take a course on Islamic faith in a Bible college.
Don't like, do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
I literally, so I was told that Muhammad was demon possessed with multiple, like 18 different demons, that he was a child rapist, like just really, or that he was a thief, and just like all these really, really horrible things. And it was like, oh my God, he's so bad. But then like, but King David was like the best man ever, even though he was also...
Oh yeah, King David was a gem. Totally.
Like, he was so problematic. And like... Yeah,
King David was awesome.
But King David is also like a prophet in the Islamic faith as well. But I'm just saying that like in Christianity, we say all these horrible things about Muhammad, but then like our own prophets have done
exactly.
those things.
And yet you don't hear within Islam, they don't slander Christianity, right? It's actually not even, it's not even reciprocated. We just rag on them and they're like, yeah, you're nice, I like Jesus too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And again, I know this is like the fourth time saying it, but like I know that we can't paint everyone with the same brush. There are incredibly problematic aspects of Islam, as there are with Christianity, as there are with every single other religion that has ever graced the face of the planet. And that's not because of religion, it's because of people. And people tend to hurt other people. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. But I think it's pretty universal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of my biggest problems that I really found with the church was that I was like, I don't have a problem with like spirituality side of it, but what I have a problem with is the control side of it. Yes. That like you're using people's beliefs and spirituality to tell them how they should live their lives, as if they don't have the connection with the divine that's going to teach them and like show them, because we all have that innately. Yes, sometimes we need guidance and that's different, but everything is very conditional. I find within the church, it's like, you know, for example, if I had an abortion, that would be like, you don't talk about it, you don't tell anyone, you don't speak of that. Like everything.
No. Of course not.
Would be so, yeah, like, and I just find it's like there's such a double standard within the church. It's like, oh, Jesus is forgiving of everything, but we're not.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Jesus is forgiving, and he loves you no matter what, and all will be forgiven one day. But like in the here and now, you're also going to suffer for it. And by suffer, I mean you're not going to be a part of our community anymore. You know, like there are some really, really, really detrimental effects of that, right? I mean that's a whole other podcast, but like just spiritual trauma.
So you went through this, and like you said, you started picking apart, kind of like, okay, well, maybe I was wrong about this, maybe I was wrong about that. And so when did you get to a point of being like, okay, maybe I am starting to look back now? Like, oh, I thought this was it. I knew I was right. And now I'm questioning. When did you come to the point of starting to question your such strongly held beliefs?
Yeah, it was probably a bunch of different, it was multifaceted. So a piece of it is that from a young age, my dad always taught me to question my beliefs. So right from a very young age, he was always, every time I thought I knew my opinion on something, he would tell me to then try to argue the opposite, right? So he was always trying to get me to challenge my beliefs. He said that the most alarming thing to me should be when I think I know the truth, right? When I think I know the truth, then that's when I need to push even further. And so that was something built into me from a young age, and I definitely squashed that for a few years. I'm also an Enneagram 1, so that's my like your blank face says it all, but it's fine. My entire gearing is toward things like right and wrong and black and right and reformation, right? Like I want to fix, I want to repair, I want to make things better. And in really unhealthy places, that becomes super fundamentalist, super judgmental. And there was a few years there where I was just deep in it.
Yeah. And I also think that's a part, sorry, just to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I also think that's a part of like having borderline personality disorder.
Oh yeah.
So just for listeners, Lauralynn and I are both diagnosed with BPD. And I think so, like, it's called splitting. And that's when we make something all good or all bad. Like there's not really gray areas for us. There's just black and white.
Absolutely. There's a chasm. There's a chasm in your mind, right? I know this and I know this, and I cannot make them connect.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's, that is, yeah, it's definitely a part of that. And sometimes I discount that. So thank you. There's also, you know, the points where I was the most unhealthy, like cognitively, were also the points where I was the most fundamentalist, because like I said, a lot of that was really manic. But when I look back, I honestly don't know how those things I don't know how nobody caught it, because it's like, you know, I'm having these like heightened spiritual experiences for a week on end and praying for hours in my room. And then all of a sudden I'm like abusing drugs and, you know, like stealing and God knows what else. And then all of a sudden I'm, you know, and then I'm depressed and I don't want to be alive for weeks. And then all of a sudden I'm like flipping back and forth. It was really complicated. But as time kind of went on, and I guess I became a little bit healthier, you know, finally starting to get like proper health, probably getting medicated was a big part of that, getting therapy and things like that. And then finally ending up going to Bible college. It's funny because the more in depth, in my opinion, the more in depth that you study scripture, the further away I think you would move from our typical Western Christianity. Because when you really dive into it, I challenge anybody listening to debate me on this. Modern evangelicalism is a bastardization of everything Christianity is supposed to be.
Wow.
So I know it's a huge statement, but if anybody wants to argue me on it, just be prepared to provide scholarly articles and references and zero logical fallacies allowed, peer reviewed. I am not going to take any like comments that are like,
I don't care. I don't want your blog post. Okay.
I don't want it.
Your Cindy Lou
your blog post.
No thanks. Like, I don't care. Okay, great. You're a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids because you're repopulating the earth. Okay. We don't need any more children.
Yeah. I mean, yes.
I do want to have kids though. One day. Sorry, mother.
Yeah, I want to have.
Forgive me.
Sorry, stay-at-home moms with 5 kids. Please forgive us. No, I just disclaimer. I think that stay-at-home moms are the fucking superheroes of the world, because I lasted 3 months of being a stay-at-home mom and then had a psycho meltdown. So
this is why I told my husband, when we have kids, you are being the stay-at-home parent. Not
I
this
absolutely
bitch.
couldn't
Not
handle it.
this bitch. No, honey, you're staying home. I'm sorry, I love you, but no.
I started.
I'm have it for 9 months. You can do the rest.
Oh, absolutely. I created that thing with my body.
Mm-hmm.
Like.
For the next 18 years?
Yeah, it's
you're the
I lasted
parent.
3 months when Yep. I definitely don't fit any of the expectations of good societal moms, especially within Christianity. So that's, I mean, a thing that I deal with on a daily basis. And I hope that as time goes by, I can be more comfortable with who I am as a mom. But it's crazy, like the kind of expectations that that get put. It's patriarchal garbage, but it's fine. The whole collapsing and the looking back, because I know that's where we went off track, but I have used this analogy before, but it's like the Jenga tower, right? So you've got all the blocks and it's keeping it all standing. And at one point it was whole, and at one point it was sturdy. And then, you know, you start pushing blocks out. And, you know, one of those blocks was like my theology on like LGBTQ affirming things. And it's like, oh, that pops out. Oh, I actually am affirming now. Great. Oh, and now I don't believe in hell. Like block pops out. Oh, and now I think that, you know, there's just so many things that fall apart. You listen to a worship song and you're like, oh my gosh, why on earth are we singing this right now? There are so many problematic things with these lyrics. And
can you like give me an example of a worship song? Can you think?
I can give you so many examples. Oh my gosh, what's the one? There was, I want to say a couple of years ago, there was like a big one that came out, and the church we were going to just absolutely loved it and played it every week. And I don't remember what it's called, but the whole chorus is like, sing a little louder. And it's all about like singing and yelling for God's attention. And Josh, actually, I didn't even connect this at first, but Josh connected it. It's like, this is very reminiscent of like the Old Testament, like cutting like their arms and like crying out for their gods to answer them. Shoot, I don't even remember.
Wow. Okay.
It's Elijah.
But I think at that point it's more about like getting the church to get excited.
Well, it's getting excited, but it's also the fact that like we need to put on a show to get God's attention. It's militant, right? So it's about like pushing forward into what God has for us, and bulldozing everybody in our way, right? It's just like God's gonna get us there, and God's gonna provide, and your promises are yes and amen. That's my favorite worship song line.
I still like hear that in my head when I'm like kind of question myself, and I'm like, yes and amen. I'm taking it.
Okay, so I do also do that because it's so ridiculously ingrained in me, but I now say it kind of humorously. I get great humor out of taking like super Christianese phrases like that, and then just using them offhanded, like hallelujah, hallelujah, our God reigns. Like I'm eating pizza tonight. Like I don't know. It feels a little bit lighthearted, and sometimes lightheartedness is useful after that. So. I don't know. Eventually you pull out enough blocks and the tower falls over, right? And
I love that.
I do think that there's a rebuilding of the tower in some ways, but it's going to be a very different. Yeah, I think that it probably actually happened kind of simultaneously. This is sort of weird, but I guess continuing the analogy, I kind of imagine that like when I was taking the blocks out, that I was moving them over and starting to build a new tower. I honestly didn't feel like I don't feel like I ever had the floor covered in mayhem Jenga blocks. I don't think that I had that kind of really traumatic disintegration of my beliefs, which I know a lot of people do have. For me, the traumatic part of it was losing community. My beliefs changed, and I've always expected that. And that's just because that's how my dad taught me, is that beliefs should change. That's what beliefs are. They should change. When you stop learning and stop evolving, you might as well be dead, right? And so I expected that for myself, and so that I don't think shocked me. But what was really, really hard to cope with, and is still currently hard to cope with, is that loss of community and kind of the excommunication factor that you get from people who were supposed to spend their lives with you. People who loved Emerson. Leaving our church community was horrific in so many different ways for us, but one of the biggest pieces, and the reason it actually took us as long as it did to actually leave, was sitting there and being like, am I pulling my daughter away from a community that loves her? I did. I took her out of a community of people who truly deeply loved her, and who would have been that community, people who were helping us out with childcare, people who were there to support us as new parents, and we removed ourselves from it, right? And I mean, it wasn't all voluntary, like we wouldn't have left if we weren't made to need to leave, I guess. But
so were you guys in a position where you guys were like asked to leave the church? Can you just like touch on how all of that happened?
Yeah. So it's like any kind of situation like that, it's complicated. And I know that's obvious. I don't think people get kicked out of church communities for simple reasons. It's usually really complex. But there were differences and conflicts that had been going on for a bit. There was, it started really benign. It started with like, I disagree with that decision, or I disagree with this way we're doing things, or that statement. But Josh and I have both been really vocal about those things. Like we've never sat in the background. We have never been people who sit in the background, right? So between the two of us, we definitely made our concerns known. And the reactions to those concerns started to get more and more problematic. And over time, we saw the community evolve into something that we never wanted, and that they never wanted. You know, the reason that we got into that church and made those connections is that we're like, oh, these are our people. These are the people who do things like us. These are the people who do church like we want to do church.
And how is that? How did you want to do church?
Loving people. Oh, it sounds so silly and like cliche, but honestly, it was like, we just want to love people. We want to live in community. We don't believe that the church is a building. We think that the church is a way of life, you know, and it's the body of Christ. And it's, you know, we had really optimistic kind of maybe naive views of it, but we were really starry-eyed, you know, like these are the people who we could do life with. And Josh definitely connected with them more than I did at the beginning. I was always a little bit more reserved. I never felt like they truly knew me, but I also saw how alive it made Josh to be in that community. And I didn't hate them. I really enjoyed a lot of the people there. And I made deeper connections with some than with others. And I just kind of stuck with those people that I did make those connections with. But we loved it. And then all of a sudden we just started to see some of the holes, you know, and it was like, oh, you said this, but this is what's happening. And you talk about this, but then 5 minutes later you say this and it contradicts it entirely, you know. And it was this way of life that we thought we believed in that just wasn't coming to fruition. And the straw that broke the camel's back wasn't actually a straw. It was like, I was going to say a log, but it wasn't even a log. Whatever's bigger than a log. It was like a cement block that broke the camel's back. Okay, so something really big happened. Yeah, it was. So we have some dear friends who, probably some of our closest friends, a couple, they've got 3 beautiful girls, and they were kicked out of our church. So they were like blatantly asked to never return.
And was this by the pastor of the church? Okay.
Yes, the leadership, which we were a part of and essentially got edged out of because we didn't agree on it. So, I have a question. Yeah.
Was this decision like, was it like, okay, we need to have a meeting about what's going on with these people, and it was like, you need to ask them to leave?
It was complicated. Again,
were you there
for the initial ones?
Okay, so there was more than one meeting.
Yeah, it was a long time horizon. It's easy to oversimplify these things. It wasn't a simple situation. It was complex. There was conflict. There were things on both sides that were flying. There was a lot of hurt feelings that got hurt. But the whole time I was just like practically screaming at everybody, like, look, this is not being handled properly. Like, these conversations need to happen in the open. Every card in the deck needs to be laid on the table. I literally said those words. If anybody who is in those rooms hears this, they can attest to the fact that I literally looked around the room and said, you have to lay the cards on the table. People can't read your mind. If you have concerns with this person and these scenarios, then you have to talk to them about it. And it didn't happen, at least not in the way that it should have. And they were eventually asked to leave, and that was it. There was nothing at that point that we could do. We found out, so before they were actually formally asked to leave, there was months of conflict over it. And we found out that we were removed from the leadership team via a Slack channel. So we got a Slack message one morning, and it was like, you've been removed from the core leadership group on Slack. Now, disclaimer, asterisk, that was said to have been an accident and a miscommunication. It was said to be a miscommunication. So I do have to disclaimer that. However,
but I know.
Well, you know what? And maybe it was a miscommunication, but miscommunications only happen, not only, but primarily they happen when there's a lack of communication. And so Josh is confident in his level of clarity and his communication. And so if there was a misunderstanding, it was from his side.
Right. And just for everyone listening, her husband Josh is actually one of the most well-spoken people and is very articulate in his thoughts, like incredibly well. He's like, he says what everyone's thinking in such like a educated way. You're like, damn son. Like, I'm like, I often read his like Facebook statuses and I'm like, yeah. But like everything that I want to say, he somehow has a way to say it.
Well, and again, for anybody else who knows the Enneagram, he's an 8, so he does not hold punches. Like, he's not sitting there going like, well, I just feel sort of kind of like, no, he is putting it on the table.
Yeah.
Right. So we were removed from the leadership team, and eventually we just walked out the door. So we subsequently lost almost every single connection that we had there. It wasn't just the leadership that we lost. We definitely maintained connection with a few select people, and those are the people who are worth it, I guess. You know, like, those are the people. They're incredible. I love them all. I love them, and I'm so happy that I was able to retain those few relationships, because those are the kind of relationships that you want to retain, right? Somebody who, if you walked with somebody in a relatively close relationship for 5 years, and they left the community that you were both a part of suddenly and unexplained, would you not kind of be concerned for this person? Would you not reach out and be like, are you okay? And then when messages started flying around after they were gone about why they left and what happened and all that kind of stuff, would you not be even more curious? Would you not be even more alarmed for their well-being?
I'd probably like drive to their house and be like, hey, give them a call. Hey, what's going on?
Yeah. Like, are you okay? What's wrong? What happened? What do you need? And that didn't happen. So, you know, with the majority of people, the people who did are the special ones. But it really makes you realize, like, okay, well, if those relationships that were supposedly non-negotiable, if they were that easy to break, then they were never non-negotiable. They were negotiable from the beginning, and the requirements for those relationships, the negotiation for those relationships is you need to agree with me and you need to adhere to my way of life. And once you start pushing back, dissent isn't allowed. So I think that, and you know what, this isn't a problem with our specific church.
Every church has this
it's
problem.
not even them. And I don't think that there was here's the other thing, and I should actually say this. I do not believe that there was an ounce of malicious intent. I don't think there was even a drop of malicious intent from anybody in that situation. What I think is that they fell so victim to these really, really damaging narratives that Western Christianity lives in, that I don't know that they had any other choice. The framework that they were given does not allow for those kind of differences in dissent.
Right.
It does not actually allow for diversity. And one of the things that they literally used to say themselves is that we want, like, unity doesn't mean uniformity. And so they always used to say that, we want to be unified, but that doesn't mean we need to be uniform. But even though they say that, their actions don't line up with that.
Well, and that's a very difficult thing to accomplish. And I know that, like, on the other side of your situation is like where I've been before, and like where I've had people leave my church, and I was just like so offended and made it more like, wow, like it was about me and not about what they were going through.
Yeah. No, I know. That's honestly, you're completely right. I don't think any of them were like worried about how much therapy Josh and Laura were going to need after this. I think that they really felt like their flock flock was being attacked. You know, I really think that it was like a shepherding decision, that they're like, we need to protect our flock. And sometimes that means taking out a few wolves. The problem is that I don't think that people get to be wolves. Like, I think that Jesus, I mean, I'm sure some people, I guess some people are wolves, but Jesus still said that he would leave the 99 for the one, you know? And so the mentality of I need to protect the 99 from the one is completely antithetical to Jesus.
Wow.
Right? And so I think that that's the other analogy that got used a lot was gardening and weeding and pruning, you know, and to weed out, to pull out the weeds from amongst the flowers, and like pruning and seasons of pruning and things like that. But like, people aren't weeds.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where I ended up sitting with it. It's just like, okay, yeah, okay. So these are nice analogies if you think that people are weeds, but that means you think I'm a weed?
And disposable. And
And
what
disposable.
is a weed? And a weed is like, who gets to decide what is a weed anyways?
It's, and
like,
again,
it's so
and
conditional.
again, antithetical to Jesus. Literally Jesus said, don't separate the weeds and the flowers, because what if you get it wrong? What if you throw the wrong one into the flames? Obvious paraphrase, but these things are spelled out. And that's what I mean, is that our version of evangelical Christianity is a bastardization.
Wow.
It is flipping it on its head, the entire, and that's why I don't feel like I can say with accuracy that I have left the Christian tradition by any means. I value a lot of those things still. I value the teachings of Jesus. I value so much of it. It's just that it's so hard to engage with those things that you do value when they're so poisoned everywhere you look.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets old, you know? At the same time, when you grow up in a tradition like that, you can never really leave it. Like never really, because that was the building blocks that you were formed on, right? And so there are certain things that like we may get to a point, maybe one day I turn into a complete materialist atheist. Maybe I don't believe there's spirit at all. Maybe I just think everything is just firing neurons in my head. I think that God is a joke and religion is the worst thing that's happened to the world. Even if I ended up in that place, I would still never be able to unlearn some of those things that are ingrained in me from Christianity. Some of those things are the building blocks of what made me me. And I don't think that I want to get rid of them all. You know, like I'm not trying to burn the whole thing down, but it's kind of sifting and seeing like, okay, what is going to serve me going forward and what isn't serving me and isn't serving other people.
I think that's so huge, especially like, I think a lot of people in my family are kind of like literally worried about my salvation.
Yeah.
Like, and it makes me really sad because I'm like, listen, I'm just doing without the shit. I'm just doing without the bullshit that we call Christianity. I'm doing without that. And what I'm doing is like doing like my deep soul searching within myself, who is connected to God. Like created by and through God, and we all have that connectedness and we all have that divinity within inside of us. And so for me, it's not like I've abandoned God. I'm like, no, I'm understanding God in like such a new and beautiful way, and that's so much more a part of me than outside of me. And that is the biggest change for me, is that like I'm not like, oh, okay, my pastor has the answers in this. I'm like, no, shh, get quiet. The answers are within you. And that's been the biggest change for me. And just really doing without the the church side of it. But yet I was raised with this so much of like the community, your community church is like such a strong part of you and you need that to build a strong Christian life and blah, 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 blah. And then I said this to my grandma the other day and she's like, honey, have you ever seen me at church? I'm like, no.
Oh my God.
She's like, but I love God. She's like, you don't have to go to church. for anything. She's like it helps a lot of people because it's community, and like as humans we want to be connected to others, and it's great to be around people who share our belief systems, and like that's so amazing. But there's too many contingencies that the church has that I will not be a part of.
Absolutely 100%. Yep. I still very much believe in community and relationships, but that community happens far more authentically outside the walls of a church.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I agree with you.
You know, and I think that the idea that you can only really be in community with people who share the same beliefs as you is also A, arrogant, and B, just inaccurate. Right? I mean, you probably also have heard, I mean, I don't know if any person who grew up in evangelicalism has never heard this, but the idea that like, well, Jesus had like his core, you know, he had his disciples, and then he had like his favorite disciples. Okay, and the idea that like you kind of have like these, that you need your closest circle to be the people who are going to bring you closer to God, because iron sharpens iron. And then, you know, and then you also want to keep those people. Yes. And then, you know, and then obviously you can have relationship with non-Christians, but like, don't let them too close.
Very close, yeah.
Keep them at a healthy arm's length. And I mean, what a sad way to live. What a sad way to live, mm-hmm. because you've just eliminated all of this beautiful diversity, and you've just eliminated all of your opportunity for growth.
And I think really like I had such a hard time with that growing up in the church, because like I was always like, and I was not really like that bad of a kid, but I was like badder.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I wasn't that bad. I don't think I was that bad. Popping ecstasy at 13.
I'm kidding.
Oh my God. But you know, I was a virgin for a very long time.
Yeah.
I was. Until I like moved in with my boyfriend. I was graduating high school.
No, I know. And you know why I know, Libbie?
Oh no, how do you know?
You know why I know?
Why?
Because I still have nightmares about things I said to you. Right? But this is one of the this is exactly what I mean, is that I would like to forget all of the horrific things I said to you. Yeah. I would love to just erase them from history.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, like I've completely forgotten all of it.
Amazing.
Like I don't, like you said that and I laughed because like I actually forgot that like any of that happened. And I don't even know what you said. Gosh. I don't know. I'm like, whatever, we were kids.
Somebody said to me, well, it was when you were going to move to Kelowna with me, and then I was all like, no.
Yeah, so like, just so everyone knows the backstory, we had like done a trip to Kelowna together. We checked out some Bible colleges. We were supposed to move to Kelowna together after high school, but then I was uninvited to go.
So in my defense, there's no defense. So, yeah. So I had a mentor in my life at the time, who will go unnamed, but said to me, because I was so mad at you.
Do I know them?
Yes. It's fine. I was so mad at you over that whole situation, and I was like, you're not bringing that into my house, and said mentor, who was very, very, very into like the whole prophetic, like spiritual, charismatic stuff, said to me, what you judge, you will become. She's like, I'm not saying that you can't like lay down boundaries, and that, you know, you should lay down that boundary. That is a good boundary to lay down with. You should not let that into your home. But just be careful that you don't judge in your heart, because what you judge, you'll become. And I just remember like, yeah, okay. and then I became you. So maybe she was right.
I don't know if I should be right the whole time or offended right now.
I don't know whether you should be flattered or offended either.
I'm a badass bitch. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm totally fine with how it ended up, but I do laugh about it sometimes because I'm like, ooh, did I just do this to myself? Did I just
So
spiritually curse
funny.
myself by judging you, and then we ended up here, you know?
Yeah, and it was
But
funny because
hey,
at that time it wasn't even just you, it was a couple other friends that were just like so,
I know.
and like truly
I know.
concerned.
I think about it. I think about it frequently.
Like truly concerned. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I get it.
I was genuinely concerned. I just had such terrible beliefs that I was operating out of. That's it. You know, like there were much better ways that I could have supported you as a friend.
But
Yeah.
like and I ended up like really getting into ministry afterwards
Totally.
anyways, and I spent a lot of time in ministry. But I think honestly it was for me like once I was in leadership at church and I was like basically as high as I was going to get without being the head pastor, because I was taking care of everything when my pastors were there. I was the one preaching, and I was doing so much. But for me, what it was like, I've given and given and given, but like my relationship between me and God became more distant, and it became more so about like, I was really concerned with like, hey, how can I serve the church? But it didn't feel like a deep interconnection with God anymore. I could like sit and pray and just feel nothing.
That's
so
exactly
I
what
just
that's totally
gave and gave and gave, but I didn't receive enough back. I don't want to say I received nothing, but I didn't receive enough.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say that actually probably even happened more with Josh than with me. I've always been reserved in many different ways. I tend to be quite a reserved person, but again, I'm kind of all or nothing. So in the situations where I'm not reserved, I'm very not reserved. But Josh really gave everything, and you end up super burnt out after the end of that. I don't think anybody, even Christians listening to that, will say like, oh yeah, no, burnout is, that happens. Yep, especially in church ministry. You give and you give and you give and you give, and then you have nothing left.
Well, and I remember even like, I saw a woman who I used to go to church with after a church service one day, and we had like an event, and we just both ended up being at the same event, and I was like, she's like, oh, how's your day? How's your Sunday? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I keep everything together and I don't know how I do it. And she was like,
that was too real of an answer. Wow, I was hoping you'd say, great, how are you?
She was like, that's why I left.
Somebody who had left.
It was someone who had left the church before and was kind of like, because I was like, I don't know how I'm keeping it all together, but I am. Somehow. Somehow. And I don't want to say it was just me, because I'm not a worship team, I'm not a congregation, I'm not this, but like it really felt like if I wasn't there, maybe that's a very like egotistical thing as well, to think and to feel that like you have to be there or it's not going to work.
Maybe.
And like that was like so much of like, oh, I need to do this and this and this, and like instead of surrendering. We're gonna have a 3-hour podcast if I get into this, but like a whole other conversation is that just made me think of that we could totally come back to, but the whole idea of being fed the story that you're supposed to be this like great woman of God, and that you're this like, you've just got all this like stuff, and I don't think that God actually calls us to be great. I don't think he calls us to be great. I think he calls us to give up our greatness. And to lay that down and to sacrifice it. But I just think we're fed these like super, I think it results in arrogance. That's what it does. It's an inflated ego. There's so many things that it causes, that it just, I don't know. And it's not to say that we don't encourage people and we don't call out people's giftings and foster those gifts. But I think that like really shining, sparkly, like you're the chosen one mentality is super damaging, because then you get to a point and you're like, oh, but I'm not the chosen one. I am 1 in 8 billion people, and I am worth just as much as all those other people, which is on one hand like a lot, because I believe that people are worth a lot. So I'm like, oh, I have the same worth as other people.
on the other hand, you also think of it that way and you're like, oh, well, we're all worth essentially nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
I literally just had this conversation yesterday, and because I keep saying I'm a star person, so there's like some up here in the Northwest Territories, there's like just some beliefs within the Indigenous communities about star people, and I had made a joke. I was like, oh my God, that's my people, and I was like, all you are dust, but I'm a star.
And see, like, I don't think there's anything wrong
really
with, like,
though, but really, like,
you know,
we're
having
all just
those jokes and stuff.
But we're all stardust, right? Like, that's literally what we are. That was the conversation I was having, is that, like, we're nothing, like, in the grand scheme of, like, what the universe is. But yet at the same time, it's like, wow, we all have such profound experiences, and there's so much meaning in that. And there's so much meaning and greatness in just being.
Yeah.
And not having to like achieve greatness or do this or do that. And it's not like it's a bad thing to want to be great and want to leave your mark on this earth, because I think those things are really important as well.
I do. I think ambition is still important.
Yeah, but I think just like the surrender of it, like, you don't have to know how it's all going to work out. You don't have to do all these things. Just like be. And sit with yourself, and what is your like your highest self telling you, the part of you that is connected to divine, the part of you that is divinity. What is that saying to you? And for me, for so long, I think like I was so blocked from being able to understand that, because I had to find the answers in church. And it was during that time,
or within the pages of your ancient book. And
now it's all just more so like, again, just looking inward. And that was just that's the biggest thing that I really took out of it from leaving the church, is learning to just look inside rather than outside or to other people. And when you make a church is all about like really like these levels of greatness, like whether we say we do or not, everybody puts their pastor on a pedestal. Everybody looks at them as if they're better than the rest of the congregation. And they have the answers. They have this. And like they might be just as lost as everybody else.
Well, they are just as lost as everybody else. And I actually, you know the passage about like more being expected from those who teach. You know, like if you're in like a position of power and authority over people, that you actually are going to be held to higher standards. So I actually think that, like, yes, you're right. Everybody idolizes and looks up to their pastors in those ways. And maybe not even just pastors, right? But your authority figures. And I actually think that the duty of an authority figure, or of like a guru in whatever way you want to paint that, is to teach you, like as my student or follower, that I don't have any of the answers. There's a I can't even reference it. There's a philosopher who talks about this in the concept of like the last guru, and like the last guru that you meet is like the one that lets you down properly, and that actually where they begin to show you their holes and show you their lack, and they're missing it, you know. And so it's like, as a leader, like I want to show you that I actually don't have it all together. And then gradually we move to the place where you go, oh, I don't need a guru anymore. I don't need a teacher anymore, because you just taught me that you are as messed up and lost as I am. And you've now taught me to look inward and to actually teach myself. I'm going to send you actually some stuff on that, because now that I'm thinking of it, that's totally, I think, where what you're talking about from like a philosophical standpoint, because it's so true. Like we have it in ourselves.
Absolutely. So now that, just like in closing, so you've left your church, and I know that is a very painful experience. Where do you see yourself going? Like you say, you're rebuilding your Jenga block tower.
Oh man.
So where is that tower going? What are the blocks that are being added?
Eventually I will end up in the psychological field. I have avoided that my whole life, and now know that that's where I will end up. However, right now it's like, I'm just in a place where I'm like, how do I be a mom? How do I get up every day and take care of my mental health and grow and learn myself, learn to listen to my body more, learn to connect with those things more. I sort of feel like I'm in a little bit of a limbo space, and it's nice. It's been hard because I'm in limbo and I feel like I don't really have a direction forward. And that can be super stressful because I don't know where I'm going or why I'm going there.
I think that can be really
also,
hard for the times right now.
I think so. You know what? That's true too. Yeah, that's totally true. I think I've been feeling it for a while, but like it's definitely amplified just by the fact that we're all locked in our houses right now. But yeah, I just think that like it's a hard season, but it's also it's been a season of massive growth. Even just the last year since leaving the church, I am a massively different person. That was really like leaving the church was the tower collapsing, and then, you know, the rebuilding process has really been over the last few years. And I don't know what the tower is going to look like when it's completed, but it's being completed slowly.
That's amazing.
So I don't know. And I think that I am trying to be more okay with not knowing, I guess.
It's really hard.
Does that answer your question?
Like, it's really being in a place of like not knowing, because we're human and we love to control things.
Yeah.
That's a really difficult space to be in.
Yeah.
So
especially
like
as a 1.
I said, oh, you're Enneagram. I'm a 7.
I know. I told you that.
It's actually yeah. So okay, that's amazing. Laura, do you have any closing words you would like to say?
No, I don't think so.
Let me ask you, if you could give yourself advice, if you could like go back and give like 16-year-old Lauralynn some advice, what would it be?
Man, okay. You're not the problem. Like, if I could speak to 16-year-old me, I would just want to tell her that you're not the problem. You're not broken. There's broken things around you, but you're not broken. And I think I would have told her to go get mental health help way sooner. Like, you know, I would have just been like, look, you need drugs now. Stat. And some like very serious therapy.
It's amazing. It's amazing how long we put that off. Well, and all in the church, right? You're very like, seek God, pray away the depression, pray away this. And I'm like,
absolutely.
So I've been doing this for 26 years. When is it gonna stop?
Here I am.
No. Okay. Well, thank you.
You know,
so
and
much.
I mean, learning what I've. Oh, sorry.
No,
I know there's like
learning.
There's like a delay, and so we totally keep talking over each other. So anybody listening to this is gonna be like, but internet. No. I was just gonna say, learning is the best part of the journey, I guess. So, you know, it's hard and it can be scary, but it also brings you into more spaces and bigger wide open expanses. And like, once you see the wide open expanse of the reality of, like, you could throw so many words of like oneness, of the connectedness, of beauty. I mean, you can't go back. Like, you can't go back from it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. It's a really, like, it's such a spiritual awakening.
It truly is. I know. And like, it sounds so cheesy and so cliche. And oh my God, I would have rolled my eyes at this.
Who cares?
You know, but God, can you imagine like listening to this conversation at like 15 and just being like, oh, they're going to hell.
Oh yeah, definitely. I probably definitely would have thought I was going to hell.
Well, see you there, I guess.
I mean, it must be a pretty okay place if I'm going.
Right? We'll make it fun. It'll be great.
I'm so excited. Lauralynn, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your story. And I am so excited to share this with the world. Love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.